But tonight, I want to speak from the heart. As a patriot, a Christian, a citizen, and the parent of 7 young kids in this country. Sometimes a data point hits our radar screen that's bigger than the news of the day, a number that tells a larger story about who we are, where we are, and what we're up against as a country. Tonight, that number is 31%. Remember it, 31%. Today, the Harvard Kennedy School's Institute of Politics released their biannual Harvard Youth Poll. They've been doing the poll for 20 years, asking 18 to 29-year-olds, so kids out of high school, out of college, early in their careers, asking them what they think about the state of our country. Over 1,000 young Americans were polled, the margin of error, 3%. There were a number of fascinating findings, but one number stuck out to us. 31%. They were asked their views on American exceptionalism. Is America an exceptional nation? 31% said America is the greatest country in the world. 50% said other nations are greater. 18% out to lunch. 31%. 3 in 10 young people in America believe America is the greatest country in the world. Now, I, for one, am not surprised by the source. As an alumni of the Harvard Kennedy School of Government, it's an elitist institution, fully infected by leftist groupthink. It's the woke of the woke. Trust me, they're not saddened by these numbers. They're globalists. They don't want America to be seen as the best. They're not saddened, but we should be. Now, we checked this same poll in previous years and other similar polls, and the closest comparison we could find today was a 2013 Gallup poll that showed that 55% in the year of 2013 of Americans that same age were extremely proud to be an American. If you're extremely proud, you probably think America's an exceptional place. So 55% in 2013, 31% today in just a decade. And you don't have to be a historian to know that if you went back a little bit further, say to the 90s or the 80s, that number would be much higher, maybe 70, 75, 80%. Here's why it all matters. Here's why 31% matters. If you go by the old adage, the children are the future, then plain as day, this poll shows that the future hates America. Or at least they think there's nothing special about America. It's just one of many countries. Of course, I know, because I get to travel this great country and meet so many of you with Fox and Friends, that this is not the universal view. There is an echo of goodness, of patriotism, of faith in the American people, of people who truly believe and understand through history and their own experience how special this America and our experiment truly is. But if I had $1 for every parent who came up to me out on the road and said, my kid went to college as a God-fearing patriot, and they came back a Bernie socialist who questions America, I'd be a rich man. And as we saw over the last year, I call it or 2 years really, the COVID-16-19 moment. It's when your kids were at home, trapped in Zoom classes, and you were over their shoulders seeing the curriculum as the 1619 Project and other elements of critical race theory and diversity, equity, inclusion came across. It was a moment where we saw what they were really teaching, that it's not just colleges and universities. It's elementary schools, middle schools, and high schools. One of my mentors at Princeton University when I was an undergraduate, he's the constitutional law professor there at Princeton University. His name is Robbie George. He had something to say recently about what he's seen and why he's seen it coming for years. Listen to this.
You know, in the old days, there were some liberal or progressive professors who wanted to indoctrinate their kids. Not all, but there were professors who wanted to take the kid who might have come from a farm family in Iowa and is now at Yale or Princeton. The kid was a Boy Scout. The kid was a churchgoer, and the liberal professor would rub his hands together and say, "Okay, I'm going to take this kid, brought up by these rubes and hicks out there, and I'm going to indoctrinate him in liberal ideology." If such professors exist today, they must be very frustrated because they lose their opportunity to indoctrinate the kid because the kid comes in pre-indoctrinated.
Now it's the other way around. That's a rough cut from a Fox Nation special I have coming out next month. It's called The Miseducation of America, a 5-part series about the 100-year progressive takeover of our country. The conclusion through that project, we're surrounded. The leftists have nearly completely captured our classrooms, all of them. I went to public school in the 90s. I got a progressive education in a conservative town. So did you in the way you were educated. So did we all did. We are all the product of a progressive educational system. It's not immune in elite schools. It's not immune in private schools. It's not even immune in most religious schools. See, the takeover was not an accident of the 1960s. That's what I always thought. Instead, it was the product of an intentional 100-year progressive takeover, an intentional targeting of what made America different, what made America special, what made America exceptional. Today, 31%. You see, America was founded on Western Christian principles. Our founders, the product of the fusion, the beauty, the brilliance of Athens and Rome and Jerusalem. They knew and understood the Bible inside and out. They knew Latin. They understood the classics. They understood human nature, who we are as sinful creatures. They built sinful creatures hell-bent on power and greed. They built a system, the first in human history, designed to restrain government and protect God-given rights for the individual. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, if we can keep it. So while for decades, patriots and conservatives fought for good things like free markets and defeating communists and Islamists, the left focused on culture and classrooms. They specifically targeted the way we educate our young people by focusing on removing the most important ingredients. They knew our Judeo-Christian faith and tradition were the key to our human freedoms. Our founders understood that. George Washington talked about it. So the progressives knew they had to get rid of it. They wrote it all down. Men like John Dewey and magazines like The New Republic. Education for the youngest was their obsession in the early 20th century, the early progressives. They built an entire school system predicated on the idea. It's called the Gary Plan. My guess is you've never heard of it. I hadn't either before this. They knew they couldn't remove God immediately because Americans were tethered to it. So they had to replace it with a new allegiance. What was it for the progressives early on? The flag. They instituted a new pledge called the Bellamy Salute. Francis Bellamy wrote it. He was a socialist. The original pledge did not say under God. That was added by Eisenhower in the 50s during the Cold War. They wanted to replace God with the flag. Later, they would discard that. The Frankfurt School showed up in the 1940s, a bunch of Marxist professors with a new theory called critical theory. Their premise was to deconstruct Western civilization. Where did they land? Columbia University, the most influential teachers' college still in America today. Now, shortly thereafter, the Supreme Court did its work, formally removing prayer in school and Bible reading. Teachers' unions, the most powerful unions in America today, the NEA and AFT, they were not initially formal unions before the 60s. They were soon captured by Marxists as well. The first president these education unions ever endorsed, Jimmy Carter. And he made them a promise that he would create a federal Department of Education. So the NEA created the Department of Education, and we never did get rid of it. The most popular textbook in America for the past 40 years, Howard Zinn's A People's History. It is literally American history if it was written by the Soviet Union. It is the best. It's been the bestseller as a textbook for 40 years. If it's not a textbook, it is used in our textbooks. So the progressives removed God. Marxists took over education. Marxists write our history. And then Democrats are in bed with them because they get elected by the power of the unions. And now, with the flag and patriotism having served their purpose, it's time for them to go too. Enter critical race theory, which is the follow-on to critical theory, the 1619 Project, and full-blown anti-Americanism. See, the point of liberal arts, according to our founders, was to liberate minds. Today, it means to capture minds and tear down what makes us great. We're definitely behind the curve. As Andrew Breitbart said, politics is downstream of culture. As my pastor, Chris Durkin, said a couple of months ago, culture is downstream of faith. We used to worship an almighty God. Now we worship an almighty government and a false utopian promise. No wonder we are where we are. There is a way to fight back and not enough time to talk about it tonight. I'll leave that for the special that's coming next month. But it starts with me and it starts with you. It's been heartening to watch parents stand up at school boards and fight back. But as my mother did the same thing in the 90s at our local school board. Did things change? Not really. It's kind of like charging fortified machine gun nests with Nerf guns. It's not going to work. We honor the charge, but it's not changing a system that's totally fortified. It starts in our homes, our churches, and in our schools, including new schools. If you have never heard of classical Christian education, you should take a look at it. 31% of young Americans believe America is exceptional. They don't know history, they don't know the world, and it's scary. As Abraham Lincoln said, the philosophy of the schoolroom in one generation becomes the philosophy of government in the next. Can you keep a country if you're teaching young people to hate that very same country? We are about to find out.